The story revolves around a pampered rich girl, cherished by her parents. At the age of 16, she went to study in Australia, got pregnant at 19, married at 20, but tragically died after giving birth to a son at the age of 21, thus abruptly ending her short life. The forensic examination revealed that her brain had suffered at least 33 severe injuries. The scene was indescribably horrific. What exactly did she experience in Australia? What kind of hatred would drive someone to commit such a heinous act? As the police investigated, the underlying reasons behind these events are both shocking and deeply saddening. Hello, welcome to the Crime Documentary Files channel. Today, let us turn our attention to Australia to uncover the details behind this case. Victoria, Australia, known as a haven for education, hosts many of its most famous universities in Melbourne, making it a top destination for numerous international students. The city consistently ranks among the top 10 global destinations for international students. Lin Dan, the Chinese girl at the center of our story, was born into a wealthy and privileged family. Being an only child, her parents doted on her and supported her wish to study abroad in Australia, where she embarked on her educational journey alone at 16. What her parents never anticipated was that this step would lead her down a path of no return. Despite her lack of experience in living independently, she had to quickly learn to stand on her own feet, finding solace and company in school life beyond just her studies. She was also very active in campus activities and met Zhuang Rongping, an older student, at a school dance. They quickly fell in love, a relationship she kept hidden from her parents due to the significant socio-economic differences between their families. Zhuang's family came from a rural area in Fujian. Their relationship lasted over 2 years until Lin Dan discovered she was pregnant at 19 in 2009. Before she could figure out how to break the news to her parents, Zhuang Rongping's mother, Zhuang Huajiao, overwhelmed with joy about continuing the family line, a significant matter in rural Fujian, personally accompanied her son to Lin's family to plead for a marriage. Initially, Lin's family was reluctant to agree due to the great economic disparity between the families and because Lin Dan was still very young, under 20 years old. However, impressed by the sincere attitudes and seeing that Zhuang Rongping was a decent person, they symbolically accepted a small bride price and agreed to the marriage. Soon after, the couple had a son in Australia. Zhuang Huajiao was thrilled to have a grandson and decided to move to this foreign land to take care of him, despite the language barrier and leaving behind her life of many years. Unbeknown to her, this decision would tragically ignite the events that followed. Married life was far from happy for Lin Dan, as she had to contend not just with her husband but also his domineering mother, Zhuang Huajiao. Particularly, caring for the newborn brought numerous conflicts to the forefront. Zhuang Huajiao viewed her role in caring for her son and grandson as not only a duty, but as an entitlement, allowing her to exert control over the family. This attitude, which positioned her as the de facto head of the household, made Lin Dan very uncomfortable. From the moment she married, Lin Dan devoted herself completely to her husband and their home. Her husband's stable income supported the family, enabling Lin Dan to be a full-time homemaker. Initially, their life together was simple and joyful. However, the birth of their child marked the end of this idyllic period. Zhuang Huajiao's intrusive presence shattered Lin Dan's dreams and disrupted the family's peace. The vast differences in their educational levels and worldviews often resulted in loud arguments within the home. Zhuang Huajiao was a woman from a poor rural background who, desperate for a son amidst China's strict family planning policies, resorted to extreme measures to ensure her son's birth. This event brought joy but also added strain to their already impoverished life. Luckily, her children thrived and settled in Australia with good incomes. Lin Dan, young, modern and well-educated, had grown up in relative comfort and sought enjoyment in life. In contrast, Zhuang Huajiao had little education, spoke almost no foreign languages, and led a frugal life, holding on to materialistic and conservative values. These stark differences led to inevitable conflicts, especially over childcare. Lin Dan saw Zhuang Huajiao as crude and desired her own space, often dismissing her mother-in-law's outdated childcare views. As disagreements escalated, Lin Dan resorted to silence to avoid direct confrontations, further angering Zhuang Huajiao, who felt she deserved respect and gratitude. This tension led to repeated disputes, and eventually, Lin Dan asked her mother-in-law to move out. Forced to leave her only son's home, Zhuang Huajiao's frustrations peaked, culminating in a tragic act of violence with a hammer. On May 4, 2012, Zhuang Huajiao arrived at a local police station in Melbourne. Due to the language barrier, she struggled to explain that she had accidentally killed her daughter-in-law during an argument the previous day and was there to turn herself in. Following her description, the police located the victim's body, which had been retrieved from the river. Although the blood had been washed away by the river water, the numerous scars on her brain were still shockingly visible. Since she had been distanced from her son's life, it was expected that any conflicts would gradually diminish over time. Why then did she brutally murder her daughter-in-law? Was there more to the story? The incident traces back to May 3, 2012. Perhaps due to missing her grandson or the desire to live with her son again, Zhuang Huajiao, who usually resided at her daughter's home, asked her daughter to drive her to her son's house. She arrived around 3 p.m. Lin Dan was preparing to bathe her 2-year-old grandson at the time. Zhuang Huajiao criticized Lin Dan's method of bathing the child, claiming the bathwater was too hot and not suitable for the child. Lin Dan disagreed and ignored her mother-in-law's opinion, insisting on bathing her son. This disagreement over a seemingly minor issue quickly escalated into a verbal and then physical altercation. According to what Zhuang Huajiao later told the police during her confession, Lin Dan first ran into the room, grabbed a hammer, and threatened to kill her. In self-defense, Zhuang Huajiao managed to grab the hammer and, acting first, struck Lin Dan, causing the 21-year-old to stop breathing. Zhuang Huajiao then put Lin Dan's body in a garbage bag, dragged it to a wheeled bin, and later that night took it to a riverbank about 700 meters from the house. There, she threw the nylon bag into the river and pushed the bin in after it. In this cold and dark setting, Lin Dan's lifeless body was subjected to one last ordeal. Meanwhile, Zhuang Rongping came home to find his young son crying alone in his room. Although his wife was missing, he assumed she might have stepped out to shop and chose to soothe his child to sleep before he himself fell asleep. The next morning, perhaps driven by fear or guilt, Zhuang Huajiao went to the police station on her own accord to confess. However, the police investigation revealed discrepancies in her story. They found that Lin Dan had suffered at least 33 medium-force blows, causing a deep indentation on her skull, a broken nose and chin, shattered teeth, and damaged gums. Her arms and fingers also showed signs of bruising and fractures, mostly defensive wounds. However, no defensive wounds were found on Zhuang Huajiao, suggesting that the real scenario was not as she described. It wasn't Lin Dan who attacked first, rather Zhuang Huajiao had repeatedly struck her daughter-in-law with the hammer. Despite Lin Dan's attempts to dodge and defend herself, she tragically fell into a pool of blood in front of her 2-year-old son, ending her life within a few seconds at the age of 21. In the final moments of her life, where was her husband? Zhuang Rongping was well aware of the conflicts between his mother and his wife. According to what he told the police, his mother had repeatedly told him that he should leave his wife. Zhuang Huajiao had struggled through a difficult life to raise her children, especially emphasizing the experience of hiding Zhuang Rongping in a pig pen to save him. which made it difficult for Zhuang Rongping, out of filial piety, to contradict his mother. He not only endured this himself, but also asked Lin Dan to forbear and try not to upset his mother. However, this endurance was meaningless, as Zhuang Huajiao's resentment had become too heavy to reconcile. Moreover, she became even angrier when she learned that Lin Dan had obtained Australian residency through marriage to her son. She told her son that any other woman marrying a permanent resident like him could get at least 100,000 USD, but Lin Dan had not brought any money into the marriage and even required a dowry from them, which she found utterly disadvantageous. Lin Dan was simply not good enough for him, and he should divorce her and remarry someone wealthier. Although Zhuang Rongping felt his mother's actions were inappropriate, he could not bring himself to blame her and always advised his wife to endure. Zhuang Rongping never made much effort to mediate the conflict between his mother and his wife. Whether it was due to the shackles of filial piety, a sense of helplessness, or simply not wanting to expend the energy, he remained invisible in the conflict between the two women. If he had spoken up more often and used his emotional intelligence to manage the tense mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship, he might not have faced such a tragic outcome. Even on the night of the incident, when he returned home and found his wife missing, he did nothing. Initially, he did not mention any discord between them to the police, thinking it was all in the past. Similarly, the silence was also shown by Zhuang Huajiao's husband. Although the couple had come to Australia together, only Zhuang Huajiao actively participated in their son's life, while her husband lived at their daughter's home. Even after the incident, there was no mention of her husband in the reports. This absence of the men of the Zhuang family in the conflict centered around the family's interests is an ironic statement. Perhaps it was this intentional or unintentional neglect and silence that made Zhuang Huajiao even more obsessed with controlling her daughter-in-law. This case of domestic homicide within a Chinese family quickly dominated the news in Australia, with the media dubbing the 50-year-old Zhuang Huajiao with various cold nicknames such as Grandmother Killer and Hammer Killer, emphasizing her cruelty and cold-blooded nature. In early 2014, the Victoria High Court in Australia began a public trial of the case. The jury was informed early on of the various conflicts between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and the defense attorney told Zhuang Huajiao that admitting to the killing with remorse might help in the trial, as this was not the worst case of premeditated murder and was not beyond redemption. However, Zhuang Huajiao insisted on her version of events, claiming self-defense and not admitting to the murder charge. Witnesses at the trial, including neighbors, colleagues and classmates, confirmed Zhuang Huajiao's poorly concealed malice towards Lin Dan. Neighbors saw Zhuang Huajiao slap Lin Dan in the car, and others saw her forcibly cut Lin Dan's hair. There were even instances where Zhuang Huajiao teased her ignorant little grandson, asking if he wanted a new mother and even once threatening Lin Dan, saying, "Do you believe I can kill you?" Despite this, Lin Dan heeded her husband's advice and continued to endure. Lin Dan's parents, filled with grief, testified in court about how Zhuang Rongping and his family had initially earnestly pleaded to marry their daughter, which later turned into malice during their cohabitation. After symbolically receiving some dowry, they even demanded it back, thinking their daughter was marrying above her station. Lin Dan had once run back to her parents' home, complaining about her mistreatment, but eventually returned to her husband and child, only to be called back overseas. Based on these pieces of evidence, the jury in May found Zhuang Huajiao guilty of murder. However, there was still debate over her sentencing between the prosecution and the defense. Defense attorney Gardner argued that Zhuang Huajiao might be deported back to China after serving her sentence, and the thought of being separated from her husband, children, and grandson, all of whom would continue to live in Australia, would be a huge mental burden during her imprisonment. Additionally, psychiatric reports showed that Zhuang Huajiao suffered from chronic depression due to isolation in prison, and hence a lighter sentence should be considered. However, prosecutor Lewis argued that despite the lack of premeditation, Zhuang Huajiao's act of killing in front of a 2-year-old child was extremely cruel and should not be treated leniently. After considering the case and the discussions from both sides, in August 2014, Judge K of the Victoria High Court ultimately sentenced Zhuang Huajiao to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving 13.5 years. Until the sentencing, Zhuang Huajiao never admitted to intentionally killing her daughter-in-law. Disheveled, she just wept with her face covered. Throughout the months-long trial, Zhuang Huajiao hardly saw her son, Zhuang Rongping, who stated that his mother had killed his wife in a brutal manner and he no longer wished to have any contact or involvement with her. He also said he would take care of his son with the help of his neighbors who had moved to Australia. In 2015, the public prosecutor believed that the sentencing was insufficient and appealed. The court ruled on May 13th that Zhuang Huajiao's sentence was to be extended to 22 years and that she must serve at least 17 years in prison. The previous considerations of Judge K, such as her turning herself in, and personal reasons, were deemed as weak grounds for leniency. The panel of 3 judges pointed out directly that this was a brutal murder. This means that Zhuang Huajiao, at the age of about 53, will likely spend the rest of her life in a foreign prison. Even if released, she will face deportation, forever separated from her dearest family. This punishment may be heavy enough for her, but it will never bring back Lin Dan's life. Ms. Cheng, the mother of the victim Lin Dan, said that she often had nightmares after the murder case erupted. She has never been able to believe that her daughter left her in such a manner. Before her death, Lin Dan had returned to China due to terrible abuse from her mother-in-law and other family members and lived with her parents for a while. Later, she was persuaded by her husband to return to Australia, which broke Ms. Cheng's heart and made her worry about her daughter's safety. Since the incident, she has been living with anxiety, depression, and stress. Psychologists have diagnosed that the incident has led to a variety of mental illnesses for her, and it may take a very long time to heal the wounds suffered by the family, perhaps even a lifetime. That concludes the sharing of this case. In this incident, 2 once strangers became a family because of the same man, both wanting to make efforts for the happiness of the family. They should have cared for and cherished each other, but it resulted in such a regrettable tragedy. The relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law is an eternal topic. When 2 unfamiliar women suddenly live under the same roof, it's inevitable they go through many adjustments. If both sides were willing to consider each other and retreat a step when facing conflicts, with less control and more tolerance, treating each other truly as family, how happy it would be. The role of the man in the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship is crucial and can be said to have a decisive effect on the development of the relationship. If Zhuang Rongping had stood up to mediate the conflicts and protected his wife when his mother slandered her, he might have made his mother realize her mistake and appeased her anger, and his wife would have suffered less and not left home or been driven away, thus avoiding escalating conflicts. Unfortunately, such real-life tragedies cannot rewrite their endings, perhaps reflecting the everyday life of countless families. There is a classic line from the TV series Ode to Joy that life is full of troubles, but we must still sing joyously and progress. The road to growth may have roses and thorns, but nothing can stop a strong heart. What do you guys think about this case? Feel free to leave your comments below the video and share your views. If you like case videos, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my updates. Please also help by liking and sharing.